With the release of patch 11.0.7 and the Siren Isles and changes that we're seeing in Mythic Plus, with it also being close to the end of the year, we can say we're getting to the end of Season 1. So I thought, why not take a look back at the dungeons from Season 1 and see how we felt about them? So I'm going to make a tier list ranking every dungeon from the Season 1 Mythic Plus pool based on how I feel they were tanking in pug groups. Hi, my name's Welgo. I'm a Prot Warrior main since Wrath of the Lich King, and I'm currently sitting at 2600 rating. I appreciate you stopping by and would love it if you considered subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. So Season 1's about to come to a close, and I'll be honest, I had a lot of fun. There were a lot of dungeons that I learned a lot of cool things in, a lot of cool mechanics in order to cheese some things, but I'm not going to look at this as my overall perspective of this. I'm going to rate these dungeons based off of how it was as a tank pugging into key groups. Running with guildies and running with friends is completely different than pugging, and I feel it changes the tier list dramatically, so let's get into it. Starting with Ara-kara, City of Echoes. Ara-kara, City of Echoes. I can't say Ara-kara. I always have to go Ara-kara. Anyway, this dungeon at the start of the season was a pain in the ass. The final boss was very difficult to get people to coordinate and pay attention to where the bloods were and where it needed to go. Overall, though, it was a lot of fun. I love the aesthetic of it. I love the look and feel of the entire dungeon, but there wasn't really anything that made it stand out from the others. While yes, the final boss took a while for people to understand what they needed to do, it wasn't that challenging once you figured that out. The first boss was relatively easy. The second boss, again, relatively easy. Avoid frontals, move around, kill shit. Easy. Third one with the positioning, especially with the poisons, was a problem. But other than that, the rest of the dungeon's pretty just middle of the pack. So I think I'm going to put Ara-kara at a B. Ara-kara, City of Echoes, really middle of the pack. Wasn't anything good enough to make it an A. Wasn't really anything negative enough to put it down to a C. And it's definitely not worth an S or a D tier. So Ara-kara, B. Speaking of B, we got Grim Batol. I love this dungeon from Cataclysm. I personally am a huge fan. I love the storyline that goes into it. I love the look and feel of the entire dungeon, but as pugging into groups, this one was very frustrating. More so with Throngus and the final boss. Throngus was a pain because people would not group up for the frontals to try to minimize how much space you'd lose with the fire. And then the final boss, you make wild players have to move to a specific area and they just lose their shit. Not to mention also the pathing in order to hit certain groups and not pull additional dragons or CCing the proper mobs to make sure that, hey, this berserker shouldn't one-shot your tank because it's got 200% attack speed. Let's help our tank out here. So it really tears me to want to like this dungeon because of how much of a connection I have to it. But pugging, it was rough, and it's still one of the tougher ones. Granted, I love the tech with the third boss with the dragon and that I learned of putting just myself in a corner, aiming top down and trying to get the mobs to, stay close to each other when they spawn. I thought that was great tech. But again, it's the commitment of trusting your teammates. And honestly, as much as I love this, I think I'm going to have to put it down at a C tier because this was one of the ones I struggled with the most to get people to pay attention to what to do. Moving on to our second War Within dungeon, we have the Stonevault. Stonevault, I have a love-hate relationship with the Stonevault. 99% of my runs with the Stonevault with pugs were fantastic. Sure, we might have wiped on a boss or two, but there was nothing that stood out to where it was super negative of those runs to where I wouldn't initially put them at an A. I don't think it was a lot of fun as a tank with the mechanics to put it into an S tier, primarily with the Scarred and Rock boss because of the fact you're relying so much on your DPS to not kill those crystals all at once and getting the right debuffs and everything, as well as the totems for the mobs right before High Speaker Einrich. But the thing that makes me put this down to a B is the one key group this season that I actually rage quit. I said, I'm not doing this. I was the first to leave. I broke my rule of never being the first one to leave a key group, and I left them to their own devices. That's because it started first with Edna, where I got one shot twice because I did not get the debuff cleansed off of me to where it increased the damage I took, and I got one shot. I had all my defensive going and everything, but it did not get cleansed. That didn't bother me. It happens. Maybe the healer didn't know about it, whatever. Easy fix. It's still early enough in the key. We don't have to worry about it. What set me off there was the rogue starting to talk that I'm shit, that I'm not a good tank because I just fall over. Saying, imagine dying to the first boss multiple times, pinning it on me. Not that I wanted him to put blame on the healer, but the lack of understanding that, hey, the tank is surviving. He's getting hit for more than his entire health pool. It's because of this debuff. That's what frustrated me. That was strike one. Strike two, and it was very early on. I left this key so fast. The final straw was moving towards the machine speaker wing, and you have those mechs that cast a frontal ability that creates this flame ball that traverses the area, and anybody hit gets a debuff that does stacking ticking damage, I believe, to it. The thing about that is it's not a targeted frontal. It randomly chooses, I believe, the furthest player, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that. So it didn't matter where I was positioned. It was going to aim further down the line. We lost 3 people to one of those abilities, and the rogue and the mage in the group decided to say how bad I was at positioning the mob, somehow insinuating that it's my fault that an ability that randomly targets a furthest party member was my fault for aiming it incorrectly and wiping the group. And I said, nah, I'm not dealing with this. You're an idiot. I'm not going to sit here and let your ignorance bring me down. So I left. And I never do that. And it's left such a fucking bad taste in my mouth that it ruins the other 99% of good runs, where I'm tempted to even put this down into a C. But because it's 99% to 1%, that's why it's going to be B and below Ara-kara. So we'll leave it at that. Moving on from my trauma from the Stonevault, we have the first of the 2 Shadowlands dungeons, which was the Necrotic Wake. Fuck this dungeon. This was and still is the bane of my existence this season when it comes to pugging groups. Not only are so many mobs kick reliant to getting count and being successful in a run, but add into the second boss with the dragon and the mobs that spawn with the 2 mages that nobody can seem to ever clock, pay attention to, or decide, you know what, I'll stop DPSing for 3 seconds to silence it. I'll just rather get hit by all these things. I fucking hate this dungeon. I think I've had more runs die at the second boss than I've had completed this dungeon this season. And I do my best. I position the boss to where it minimizes the gap between the mobs being placed. I will heroic leap taunt to make sure I get aggro on the mages, plus a spell reflect or spell block, do whatever I can, challenging shouts, anything I can to hold aggro. And yet it's still never enough. And all it takes is one mage to get missed and DPS, healer, anybody with ranged kicks to go, oh, I'm just going to focus the boss to where we wipe. Not to mention the amount of times I've seen the third boss, the hook lined up perfectly by the DPS to bring down Stitchwork or whatever the hell his name is. And for it to go, you know what? It's lined up perfectly, but we're going to aim low, not high towards him. Go fuck yourself, gamers. Just nah. Fuck the Necrotic Wake. I don't ever want to see this dungeon again. This was my first time ever playing it because I skipped Shadowlands. I don't ever want to step foot in this dungeon again. I don't care if there's mounts or transmogs I need in there. This one, if I could put this a tier lower than D, I would. But then I'd just be constantly making lower and lower tiers until there's just absolutely nothing left to put it on. So honestly, I'd put it unranked, but we're going to leave it at D because fuck Necrotic Wake. That's going to be the end of that. The Dawnbreaker. I'm not sure if people agree with this, but I'm putting Dawnbreaker in an S tier. And I'm putting it at an S tier, even taking my own personal feelings aside from it, because I think it's one of the best made dungeons. I love the aesthetic of it. I love this dungeon for the same reason why I love No Coup Defensive. I love the idea of us being in an entire zone as a dungeon, rather than a specific linear route. To be able to see and be like, oh, we're in the entire zone fighting this. And not only fighting it, but adding in the fact that the final boss, Rashanan, is one of the bosses in the raid for Narubar. I just think that's incredible. I love the entire storyline to it. I love the look. I love the feel. You know, you got Belladar's crystal fucking purple the entire time. I love and I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but as a pug tank, I love that there's so many possible routes you can do. Is there an optimized one? Absolutely. There's 1 or 2 that I usually go to based on the group that's better than all the others, but I think I've probably ran more routes in this dungeon alone, like specific unique routes for this dungeon that I just absolutely love. And all the mechanics in this dungeon too are so easily manageable. And even when somebody messes up and you miss it, it's easy to learn. I don't think I've had a single Dawnbreaker where I went, God, I don't ever want to come back to this place. And in my guild, we're joking because it seems like that's the only key we can get. And I'm like, you know what? That's fine. I'd rather run Dawnbreaker over and over and over again than Necrotic Wake any fucking day. So as a pug, it's been really good. And with guild groups, it's been really good. And just overall aesthetically, it is fantastic. So Dawnbreaker is an S tier for me. We go to another one that I've never done before this season, and that's going to be the Siege of Boralus. Now, I did play Battle for Azeroth. I did miss a few patches in between. So this was my first time playing Siege of Boralus. And going into the season, I had heard a lot of people tell me that this was one they were not looking forward to. They hated this dungeon playing it in Battle for Azeroth, and it was just not a good one. However, and I'll probably go against what people are thinking, I'm going to put this as our first A tier. We had a lot of fun with this one. Even though there's a lot of mobs that do a lot of damage increase debuffs to me as a tank, which makes me sketchy for pug groups, that gets outweighed by just how well this dungeon flows, in my opinion. The mobs make sense for the grouped up abilities. The pathing is so straightforward, but also fun and exciting to see the whole story unfold as well too. Plus, as the season went on and watching a couple MDI shots of it, understanding that there's a challenge mode I could do to myself of diving in front of the firing lines and try to stop them before the cast goes, it's just a lot of fun. I've had more fun than I thought I would going into it based off of everybody's reaction to seeing Siege of Boralus. I think it's incredible. I think it's a well done dungeon. The only thing preventing it from being an S tier with Dawnbreaker is comparing my runs with Dawnbreaker to Siege of Boralus, is there's been more fuck ups on Siege, especially when it comes to the final boss and those debuff swirlies that get applied to everybody, that has caused me to lose keys by like 2 or 3 seconds. Barely anything. Otherwise, it's a very well done dungeon in my opinion, and plugging it wasn't off. When it came up as a key, I was like, it could be better. But I was never upset by seeing the Siege of Boralus was on there. Just never saw a problem with it. The final dungeon of the War Within for this season was the City of Threads. I really want to like this one. I really want to put this one higher than where I plan to. But this one's going C tier. C for City. Because the first half of the dungeon is so good. It's so fun. With a pug group, it's all right. Except for the very first poll, it's very good. The first poll with the 2 casters into the first pack, nobody silences, so it usually results in a death or 2. And as much as I want to hard send and do the full 7 mob poll, usually I have to calm down and do 2, then 5. The rest of the dungeon, the finding the spies, the clearing of mobs, even the first boss, if people are paying attention that they have to move with the tank, it's fairly easy to pug. There's not a lot of difficulty with going through it, and it's a lot of fun as a pug tank. What puts it as a C tier is every boss after. From the twins and people not understanding that you need to stack in on the tank when he's got Rhyme Dagger, to not only positioning incorrectly to where we're not chasing them down during the intermission and their sidestep abilities, then moving forward into one of the most asshole designed bosses for any tank with that blob amalgamation that said, you know what we really want to do? We want to make these things heal the boss if you don't get them, but fuck your self-healing if you get them. So choose. Do you want to be here for 17 days, or do you want to die faster than you anticipated? And then one thing I never thought would be a problem pugging would be the shifting anomalies in the final boss. You would think something along the lines of shifting anomalies would mean, hey, things are going to move at you. You should move with it. Nope. People just sit and hardcast, and it's no fun. First 25% of this dungeon, fantastic. The final 75% of that dungeon stays in C tier. It's awful. I like the aesthetic. I like the look. But putting together a random group of pugs, no bueno. This is still the last one I don't have time for a 10 either for my portals. And it's pissing me off that I can't time this fucking dungeon. And I'm just done with it. I want to get my portal and never come back to it. That's why it's at C tier. And then the final one, the Mists of Tirna Scithe, the second Shadowlands dungeon. Again, a dungeon I had not run prior to this expansion. So there was a bit of a learning curve to it in terms of pathing, especially with the maze and everything that goes with the bosses. And honestly, I'm going to put this one at B tier. I've had good moments, I've had bad moments, but nothing that's ever made me go, I don't ever want to run this dungeon again. The fairy boss with her clones and the Volpera that'll stun you, not that big of a deal. Is the maze frustrating when you think you've got it right and then you just keep getting teleported back to the front? Sure, but it doesn't kill every key that I've ever been in. Plus, it honestly is a nice break when you fuck up the maze and you go, you know what? I almost died on that last pack at like 2 very different times. Maybe just an extra moment to cool off and reset and wait for cooldowns to come up isn't a bad thing. And the mobs, there's nothing that really stands out to me as like super difficult or super memorable. It's a very standard dungeon. And honestly, I'm going to put this above Stonevault because Stonevault is just bad memories, whereas Miss is just, it's good memories, but not memorable. But that's my tier list. Obviously, more middle ground than top tier, and fucking remove Necrotic Wake from the game. That's all I'm going to say. But this is my tier list for how I feel plugging these dungeons in season 1. There's still a couple weeks left in the season, and maybe my opinions will change. Definitely won't change for Necrotic Wake, but maybe Grim Batol or Stonevault goes up. Who knows? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you agree with my list? Do you think one is in the wrong spot? Or do you think I'm absolutely bonkers for putting Dawnbreaker at number 1? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tier list and want to see more like it, feel free to subscribe and stick around a bit longer. So until then, my name's Welgo. I hope you enjoyed the video and please have a wonderful rest of your day.